So, ladies, we have been podcasting like wildfire all over the place. And so today we're going to talk about more things in this episode. So, hello, woman beings. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Woman Being Podcast community,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds.
Without expectation or judgment,
we will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
Hello, woman beings. How are you today?
Doing swell.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kelly.
And hello to our woman being audience. I'm here with the lovely Emma and Kelly Ann, and I'm Kelly, and we make up what is called the Woman Being Podcast, if you didn't know. But if you didn't, now you're in the loop.
Now you know.
And if you did, we love you. Today, we're talking about COVID and the current political climate and tensions that have arisen from these topics, and also just like how we're doing. We're doing a little temperature check. So it's no secret that this past year, and some, has been particularly difficult. And with, politics, pandemics, protests, pronouns,
rioting,
parliament, question mark.
Oh,
purses.
We were doing
purses.
Keywords.
Puppies.
Princesses.
Potatoes.
Yeah, so a lot of hard things have been happening. Point being, we've had a lot to unravel. How are we feeling today, ladies?
Em? How are you feeling?
Not everyone go at once.
So much deflecting happening today. I'm feeling good. Yeah, I mean, I think that it feels like we're in sort of like a weird spot of like sort of peace at the moment, as far as our parliament and our pandemic.
Oh yeah, we're continuing this.
Yeah. We're not letting it die.
Perfect.
I can't think of another P word.
Particularly?
Petunias. This has been particularly challenging. So yeah, I feel like after we had a turbulent 2020, obviously, there has been a pandemic. It's still ongoing. There's been lockdowns on lockdowns, and we also have had an election, a very, very turbulent election. We have had a riot that resulted in invading the Capitol building. We have had accusations of false elections and electoral votes or results. And so it's been a lot of stress, I think. And now it feels sort of like we're in a moment of dust settling. And on top of all that, we've had a huge moment of racial reconciliation awakening across the country. And so there's also that.
Not to mention hurricanes and wildfires.
Oh, yes. Not to mention crazy, insane, natural disasters that have happened and freaking tornadoes in Iowa and all of that. And so, yes, it's been crazy. So I think that I'm doing hesitantly okay.
Okay.
That's how I'm doing.
Yeah. You're somewhat hopeful.
Yeah. I'm there's a new president. The old president is not on social media anymore, so we don't see this whole swath of volatile tweets and things. And we have a vaccine for the coronavirus. We have initiatives being put into place to try to alleviate racial injustices. So cautiously optimistic.
How about you, Kellyanne? How are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, all the things Emma said, good things.
Ditto.
I would say I'm not as optimistic yet because it feels like there's this, oh my gosh, words are escaping me, trial coming up where they impeach a president that's no longer a president. And I think I don't really understand that. Maybe I should educate myself on the political process there. But I'm like, I don't understand the point. So part of me feels like some things are going to be brought up again, that it's like it feels like we just made some headway. Like, part of me is like, just let it go. But also, like, I understand if there are very serious accusations that need the justice system needs to play out. And I know that's very important, and I want to give space for that. I would say I'm probably a little more disconnected right now. I'm just kind of like, I'm over it. You know, everyone's like, the vaccine, we can go back to normal life. We actually can't yet. People are like, I can go see my grandparents. I haven't seen them in a year. And it's like, actually the vaccine, the companies that are producing the vaccine don't claim that you can prevent the spread, that's preventing the spread. Actually, you can still pass the virus on. And so I think even though things are looking more hopeful, I'm a little less hesitant to be like, things are better. No, not that hesitant. Yeah, a little bit more hesitant. Not that Emma is saying everything's better, but it feels like we're moving in a good direction. However, yeah, I would say I'm a little bit disconnected from what's happening at this point, because I'm just kind of like, okay, I have been maxed out. I feel like I have handled about as much as I can handle at this point, and I kind of need some space.
I get that. I feel that. I think I'm at the point where I'm like, I'm ready to randomly decide that I want to go out to dinner, and to be able to do that and sit down at a table in a restaurant and eat.
Yeah.
And although places in our rural area may be open to that, I'm also balancing trying to be a responsible citizen and not spread or risk spreading any sort of virus. So I feel like I'm starting to feel frustrated, I think, starting to is probably an understatement, but like I think like it's hitting me now.
Getting frustrated.
It's hitting me now. Well, we talked about this earlier today.
Yes.
Sometimes things hit me a little late. So I'm really feeling like I'm ready to travel. I'm ready to make plans. I'm ready to just freaking eat at a restaurant without having to wear a mask. And
Totally.
And I feel like we're a ways out from that. So definitely like the pressure of just this pandemic is just like, It's also winter and there's a lot of rain and not a lot of sunshine, and that's affecting me. But I think overall, like, I'm all right. You know, I think I wouldn't call myself hopeful or unhopeful. I would probably just say like, I'm seeing how things play out.
Yeah.
And you know, we'll see. But that's one of the things I've noticed about the pandemic, though, has been like how peer pressure is so much a part of our life. And so I'm curious, have you guys struggled with or noticed the peer pressures associated with conversations surrounding these types of topics? And for example, in my workplace, I feel like I'm surrounded by people who all unanimously disagree with me politically. And so they're like very loud and like open about their political views. And I kind of feel like peer pressured into silence and or like feigning agreement on some level. And I feel like people these days so flippantly say like, just don't give in to peer pressure. But like, it's obviously a lot more complicated on that. And I was curious, you know, what your thoughts? I feel like we don't really acknowledge how hard that actually is.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with you on that. Like, people do say pretty flippantly, like, especially, like, to the younger generation, you know, like, if you're in high school, middle school, college. I mean, younger generation. Not that much younger than us, but, like, it's like, oh, just don't do it. Don't give in to peer pressure. But, like, peer pressure is so much more nuanced than that. There's so many social implications and people reading into your actions and what you agree with, don't agree with, what you stay silent on. I agree. I don't agree with. I mean, I think that there are people in my office space that have very interesting opinions that I want to hear because I want to hear all opinions.
Yeah.
And there's some things I agree with, but they're pretty open. And I think that's okay to an extent. But also I'm like, you know, I kind of just want to be like the silent observer sometimes. But there is a peer pressure. And I think whatever your beliefs are about the pandemic, about politics, like, I feel like more than ever right now, there's pressure on both sides. And I kind of find myself staying silent because I want to step back and observe. Whether that is right or wrong, I don't know. That is just my natural tendency at this point. But yeah, peer pressure is much more than people lead to believe.
Well, and I think it's playing such a huge role in the way things are going right now. I mean, okay, so here's an example. This is my guilty confession. My chiropractor, no one wears masks at the chiropractor. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I just like went in not wearing a mask because no one really was wearing masks at that point. And like no one still wears masks. And like I just don't wear a mask when I go in because like when I do, it gets awkward. And, like, people don't know how to respond. And, like, I've already set a precedent of not wearing a mask. And it feels, like, weird to, like, suddenly start. And because I've, like, let it carry on this long, I haven't worn a mask. Even though, like, I personally probably would feel that it was better to wear a mask.
I'm curious about that because have you tried wearing a mask?
Yeah,
before?
I did one time when I had potentially been exposed, but like wasn't showing symptoms, but like needed health care, you know? And so like I went in and I wore a mask that day, and the chiropractor was kind of like,
Did he say anything?
He didn't say anything, but there's like that look of like, what?
Oh, you're doing that.
Yeah. And like he didn't know what to do because he didn't have a mask, and then he like adjusted me or whatever, and I left. Yeah. And then I was like, he doesn't know I was just doing it because I got exposed or whatever. But now I'm like, this is like a year in, man. And I like, no one's wearing masks.
Yeah.
Another thing I'm curious about that is how invested do you think they are in whether or not you wear a mask?
I don't know. That's the thing. I'm just saying this is a powerful force. Like, I don't even understand it because in other situations, like where I know people don't like wearing masks, I've been like, hi, we're wearing masks. Bring it.
Yeah.
You know? So like, but it feels like sort of that precedent has been set and like no one's expecting it from me. And so like I feel like it'd be too weird to wear one, but maybe I should just.
What would happen if they think you're weird?
Bite the bullet and wear it. I don't know.
I guess is nothing. You know?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a similar dilemma because my roommates and I have started rock climbing, and we go to the rock gym, and there most of the people don't wear masks. And we had to sign a document when we came saying that we would. And
that's interesting.
It's part of their like newer COVID like waiver they have. Like you have to sign a waiver saying like basically it's not the gym's fault if you get COVID / like you are supposed to wash your hands when you arrive and when you leave and also wear a mask. And I've seen a handful of people wear a mask in the gym, and the vast majority don't. My roommates and I walk in there with our masks on every time. And yesterday, actually, we were there, and one of them was complaining. She was like, I feel like we're not going to make any friends at the climbing gym because they think that we're just like standoffish because we're the girls that wear masks. And we only take our masks off when there's like basically nobody in the gym. And I'm like, I mean, I think that those relationships, if they're going to happen, they'll happen. And like people have still talked to us with our masks on. But there's, it's hard because it's like, it does feel like, oh, maybe we're missing out on something because we've chosen to like make this sort of stand here and say like, okay, we think this is the right thing to do, especially since one of my roommates is a teacher. She has to go into school every day and she has to wear a mask all day at school. And if she gets sick, she could expose all of her students. Like there's that factor that definitely contributes to our desire to wear masks at the gym. But I mean, at the same time, it's like there are times when we're climbing and we get out of breath and we pull our mask down and there's like nobody around us when we do that, but are we still causing a chance for exposure in some way?
Well,
and
you
so,
also have like the solidarity though of like a group that you go with.
I do. I was thinking about this. I was going to say when we were talking about it yesterday, if I were going there alone, like I think I said this, or I thought it. Sometimes I don't know the difference. But if I were going there alone, I don't think that I would wear a mask because I'd feel too like singled out.
Yeah.
But the fact that I'm like rolling in with my two roommates and we're all wearing our masks, like even the front desk guy like saw the two of them without their masks on once and was like, oh, I didn't even recognize you without your masks on. Like you're the mask girls. And so it's weird because it's like that's almost like our reputation now is linked to the fact that we choose to wear a mask at the gym.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is something that, I don't think I would do if I were going alone.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't feel that confidence.
Well, even in my workplace, like people don't wear masks in my workplace. And there have been situations where like, you know, like, oh, someone I know may have been sick or like may have been exposed or whatever. And it's been like, my husband's been like, Kelly, you should probably wear a mask to work. And I was like, I don't think you understand. Like, I can't just roll into work at this point with a mask on with this like employer, you know, like it would be just weird.
Yeah.
No, I think that more than just it would be weird, it seems almost like it would be a poor career move.
Right,
That's
exactly.
What it feels
like it feels like I would be putting myself out there as someone who's like not assimilating to the group. And I was worried about it. At that point it was like newer in my time there and I was like, that's going to affect my like standing with them.
Yeah.
It's definitely interesting within the workplace because it feels like the standard is set by whoever's in charge. Mm-hmm. And whoever's in charge, everyone else kind of filters that down on that same expectation. And so like in my workplace as well, like no one wears masks, which for me, I'm like, I'm constantly exposed to these people and like our desks are 6 feet apart. So I'm like, we are somewhat compliant. And the masks actually, they don't stop you from getting the virus. They just significantly reduce. But like viruses live on surfaces. They're on your body. I mean, so I weigh my options, but I'm also like, I actually really admired my husband because I recently observed him walking into a social situation and someone said, hey, you don't have to wear a mask here. And he's like, yeah, I know. And he kept his mask on the whole time and he stuck to his guns.
Oh, my husband did that this summer.
It's kind of very inspiring. Like he just does not care what people think of him. I kind of care. I mean, I don't care necessarily what people think of them, but I'm also like, I weigh my options, you know? I'm like, I mean, and outside of work, I have a very small group of people that I spend my time with. And those are my people. And other than that, like, that's I have my 4 households. And so it is interesting. And then at my gym that I go to, no one wears masks as well. There isn't paperwork actually saying like, hey, all this stuff. But there also is like we have like sliding doors, like all down one wall, and they're constantly open when we're working out. So I'm like, we're kind of outside. And we definitely are 6 feet apart.
As well.
I don't know. It's hard to know what the right thing to do is because it feels like your morality and your political beliefs and a lot of things are staked on whether you do or don't wear a mask. And I feel like it's much more nuanced than that. But also I'm like, you know, if I'm going to be considerate to what the situation is. Like if I'm going into a new situation or for example, like the grocery store, I have no idea who the people are around me. Like it's a common courtesy to wear a mask. But in my workplace, it's like, oh, people don't care about masks, and they also wouldn't show that common courtesy to anyone else. So it's kind of like,
Yeah, I mean, once again, the caveat that we live in a place that's like very anti-mask. Like
Yes.
it feels almost like even the fact that we are willing and perfectly fine with wearing masks is like a radical thing to think in this area.
It's like you're giving up your freedom. And I'm like, it actually doesn't cost me anything to put something on my face.
Yeah, you might as well like lay your guns down and like ask the government to come control your life.
Yeah, that's
kind of
the mentality around it. And I think that it's interesting because I wonder, I'm like fleshing out this idea in my head as I'm saying it, but I wonder if there's anything that factors in the fact that we as women are more, I don't know, like, are we more willing to give up these quote unquote freedoms for the sake of others? Because we have not really been afforded freedoms for very long. If that makes sense? Or like we have lived with some sense of like a limited freedom compared to the white man in America. And so it makes me wonder if like we have more sort of like a willingness towards that because we haven't experienced the like unregulated freedom that comes with being someone who has all of the privileges in the United States.
Or maybe that it doesn't cost us as much. Like, you know, like a man walking into a social situation. Like, I'm choosing to wear a mask and I don't care what you think of me or what the implications are versus a woman. Like, oh, I can't deny, like, I mean, I don't care what you think of me necessarily as a person. I am concerned, though, of the potential repercussions. You know?
Yeah, I think that women are also often, at least in my experience, more inclined to, like, women are more inclined to sacrifice their own needs for others. I think that part of that comes with, like, the inherent ability that we have for motherhood that, like, puts us in this position where we are willing to sacrifice so much for the sake of our children. And I think that for so long, women have been doing that also for their husbands. That I think I could see both sides of like either maybe women feeling particularly reluctant to do something that they think is restricting freedoms because they have worked so hard to gain the freedoms they do have. But I also see a quicker willingness to do something that feels inconvenient that for the sake of others, because there's this sort of almost like, I hate like saying broad generalizations about women, but
this is a generalization.
This
so
is. And
take
so,
it with, a grain of salt.
Yeah, I think that what I've observed is more women being willing and understanding about something like wearing masks.
Yeah, I've actually, at least anecdotally, I can support that with the people that I've been in contact with, like family, friends, workplace associates, etc. It feels like I'm more likely to come across a man who's like, I'm not doing this, too bad. I'm going to walk in and do whatever I want, and they can't stop me, and they can tell me to wear a mask and I won't listen.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like women are more like accommodating in their mask wearing. They may like personally disagree with the wearing of a mask as a whole, but like depending on the social situation are more willing to like do it out of courtesy or respect for other people. But again, that's anecdotally, so I don't know what the statistics are on that, but
I feel like kind of beyond the conversation of like women being willing to give up freedoms and so on, like it is kind of an issue that it's very black and white in the sense that you can have an opposing opinion to the general CDC recommended guidelines, what media is telling you to do and all these things, but then it gets into conspiracy theory really quick versus like, or going along with what you feel like is recommended. And it's been interesting to watch men versus women, but also like these two like pockets of ideas of like, there's nowhere like happily in the middle. Mm-hmm. And that's where I've been finding myself most interested. Like, for example, I'm a huge Joe Rogan fan, if you don't know yet. But Joe Rogan talks about like, no one's talking about your health in this situation. Like, it's statistically proven that vitamin D and zinc and vitamin C help, one, reduce your chances of getting illness in general, but also increases your like recovery time. You're going to recover much quicker. And so it's interesting seeing all the social nuances past men versus women, you know?
Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, it's like we've seen a lot of like information floating around, and it's hard to like grasp like and grab hold of something and have it actually stick. Because definitely at the beginning of this, we were like, take vitamin C, and then it was like, don't take vitamin C. So I think that has made things a lot more confusing, and I think has caused a lot more unrest for sure, like a mixture of facts and...
Well, and there's been so much back and forth from the beginning. Like, it felt like the CDC kind of changed their mind a few times. And then even, what's his first name? Fauci. Anthony Fauci, when he came out and basically was like, yeah, I just told you not to wear those because I wanted to save them for healthcare workers. Everyone's like, oh, shit, you just lied to us. And so I feel like when there's rocky ground in the beginning, I feel like it's very hard to gain trust of the public over time. Like, I feel like it needs to be more like, hey, like, we don't know for sure if this is going to help, but we think it might. So, like, let's start off with this, you know?
You know, that's really interesting you say that, because I feel like from the news sources I was gathering information from, that was the message I was hearing. Was we don't know for sure. These are the things that we know so far. We're not 100% sure. Like, this is what we think could help. And I mean, I think also that people often think of the CDC as some sort of, or just government organizations in general, as some sort of like all-knowing, like big unified body. But like this virus was new to them just as much as it was new to us. So like they were learning about the virus as it went, and they gave the best recommendations they knew how at the time. And even with, it's interesting hearing you say that about Anthony Fauci, because what I had heard was from the start was, don't go and buy a bunch of medical masks because we need to make sure there's enough for healthcare workers. And so to me, I'm like, I don't see where Anthony Fauci like lied to us, because that was the narrative that I heard from the start. So it's just really interesting to hear. I think it enforces even further the ways that the news sources that we get things from changes radically the way we think about something and the way that we view something. Because like me hearing you say that sounds like totally the opposite of what I heard. And is also, I think, part of why there's so much like divide and so much pressure that we experience in our workplaces, in our families, in our friend groups, because we're not all getting information from the same place, which is beautiful and amazing that we can go to so many different places to get information. But we are treating the information that we receive as if it is like
gospel truth.
Yes, as if it's essentially holy scripture.
Yeah.
And we are treating it as if this is the infallible truth that I am going to believe, and that's it.
Right, and any other source is automatically lying to you.
Yes.
Like, there's no other way. And it's like, we gotta...
And I think that this sort of like we've seen pushes towards more and more sort of radicalization in politics and in just like ideologies over the past decade, past 20 years. Really, it's been slowly moving in that direction ever since the start of our nation. And it's just like becoming more and more prevalent. I think especially with social media and like people being able to spread messages so much faster now. It's come to a point where things are so radically divided that you can't have a middle ground or still be in community with somebody when you disagree with them.
That's actually a great point, because I think that's been, I think that's the big question that everybody has, is like, how do we deal with this, like, polarization? These are people I know and I trust, like, these are this is family, or these are my friends. And so I was curious, like, have you two noticed any strains in your relationship due to everything that's been going on?
Definitely there's been some interesting strain, I feel like, on all relationships. Originally, at the beginning of the pandemic, the three of us would sit outside in lawn chairs, and we wouldn't
6
go
feet
inside.
apart,
And then, we decided, this is my circle of people or whatever. And even
as restrictions loosened up.
But also, like, even within my marriage, James is like, "You're not wearing a mask at work." I'm like, "No, I choose not to wear a mask at work." And he's like, "Oh, well, I wear a mask at work." And I'm like, "You do?" Yes. And so even navigating that, my parents wanted us to come home for Christmas, and I said no, because they're in their 60s. Well, they're just now in their 60s. Yeah. And, like, I would be devastated, like, if I flew home and somehow, God forbid, contracted the virus and brought it home to them. But now also I'm going on a company trip to Florida. And so, weighing those things, and, like, those planes have been sanitized, the rooms are sanitized, the resort is taking COVID precautions that my family wouldn't, and it's a slippery slope. That's what I have to say.
It's hard to know what the right thing to do is, for sure. And I've been thinking about this and sort of reflecting on, like, looking at relationships that I have in my life. And I think that when it comes to my family, in a way, I'm kind of lucky, because I have disagreed with my family on a lot of things for a long time. So we've had lots of conversations about, specifically, the biggest thing I've disagreed with my family about over the long term has been faith. So we've had lots of conversations about faith, lots of arguments about faith. And I think that because we've done that and still been able to say, I love you and I'm here for you and nothing's going to change that, it sort of has prepared my family for this, where now there's other family members where I have huge disagreements with about racial equity, or about who should be president, and things like that, and even about how to observe coronavirus restrictions. And that has, like, I feel like it's turned into some conversations that are hard, but also conversations that are still respectful. And so I'm very grateful in that. I have had hard conversations with friends who, there was a reunion of some friends that was planned over the summer, and I spoke up and said, this doesn't seem like this is the right thing for us to be doing right now. I would love to see all of you, but we're in the middle of being locked down, and it wound up getting canceled. And I feel partly like that was my fault, and I felt really bad about that, and have had fear of, like, these people are not going to want to be my friend anymore because I spoke up about this. But I also spoke to some other people within that group and realized that I'd given a voice to something that they were feeling but were too afraid to talk about. So I think that at the same time, it's like, if this is going to cause you to not want to be in a relationship with me anymore, then did you really value that friendship that much in the first place?
Yeah.
I think that's a factor for me as well, where it's like, if you would let a disagreement about the pandemic make you say, well, I'm going to throw away all the other relational equity that we've built over years, and all the great things that we have had in this relationship, if you're going to say that those things are worth throwing away over this, then I would say that they don't value that as much. I haven't had someone who said, I'm going to just stop being friends with you because of this, but that's my thought, is like, I guess that friendship wasn't valued as much as I thought it was, if that were to be the case, you know?
It's one thing though too, like, because some people are acquaintances or like, you know, surface level friends that, you know, it's kind of like different. But then in other cases, like when it's your family or, you know, people that you're really close with, like it can be very difficult. I mean, I've at least experienced in the last year, like kind of feelings of like hurt, like people being hurt by me setting up boundaries or saying like, no, I don't think that's a good idea or whatever. It's almost like people are taking it as a personal rejection, not as like there's a pandemic and we all need to be like caring for it. Because like in some people's minds, the pandemic is not something that needs to be like, you know, a cause for concern, and they're running around and like, you know, meeting people or whatever. But like when people set up boundaries like that, they feel like offended. And so even my brother's wedding was this summer, and my husband and I chose to go because it's my brother and it's his wedding. But this was the case where Ross decided to wear a mask the whole time. I didn't. I just like gave in to peer pressure kind of, and he didn't, and he got a lot of flack for it the whole time. And I think that there was almost like it felt like a barrier to people to being able to like talk to him, or that it's like maybe he felt like they were judging him and they felt like he was judging them. And I mean, at the end of the day, like everyone was fine. But I mean, throughout this year, there have been times where I've said no to things, and like it's put a definite strain on relationships. And even for things that shouldn't, like I wanted to have a Christmas party and, you know, decided to cancel it. And certain people had strange opinions about that, you know, and it's kind of like, oh, like this actually hits really close to home to people no matter what. So
yeah, it's like they're taking it personally.
Exactly.
And it's really interesting because I feel like this frustrates me so much, and I do it too, is that people go off of assumptions so much. Like there's so much assuming, where because somebody like Ross wears a mask to a wedding, or because my roommates and I wear masks to the gym, you're instantly thinking, oh, well, they're totally unapproachable. They are judging me. And I'm judging them. I think they're wearing a mask, so I think all of these things about them. And they must have this political leaning. They must believe this. And this is what I know about them based off of all of this. And you don't actually know that, because you haven't talked to them about it. And I'm guilty of this too, because I think about when I go to the gym and I see a bunch of people without masks and they're just like hanging out, having a grand old time. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I'm like annoyed with them, because there's just it seems so like blatantly unsafe. And I'm then making assumptions about them, like, oh, well, they're probably this political leaning. They probably think this. They're probably whatever. And it's so frustrating because we can't make assumptions about people like that when we don't actually know them. I don't even know their name. Like, how am I to assume all of these things about a person just based off of this impression? And I think that is part of what is contributing to all the division we have right now, as well as we see someone looking a certain way and we assume that they must align with all of these different things. I even think about how today at the networking event we went to, we met a woman who's covered in tattoos, right? She has all these tattoos, she has piercings, and like
She's
differently
awesome.
colored hair. And the assumption that people often have about someone who looks like her is that they're standoffish, that they're mean, that they are like rude or whatever. And she was so nice, so kind, so sweet. I've had other friends who look like her and they were also so nice and so sweet.
Yeah.
Just because someone looks a certain way doesn't mean that they ascribe to all of these assumptions that you place upon them. And I think that sure, there are certain things that people do with their appearance that are taking a stand.
Yeah.
There's shirts people wear.
Hats.
If they have or hats that have a certain message, they are purposefully saying, this is my stance.
Yeah.
But I think that, I mean, for one, wearing a mask shouldn't be a political issue.
Mm-hmm.
For two, wearing a mask shouldn't say so much about your politics because it shouldn't be a political issue. And also because you don't know what someone's heart is. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily judging you for or for not wearing a mask.
Yeah. That's true. There's a lot of assumptions being made throughout all of it.
Yeah,
But
that's true.
I just wanted to point out, like, the strain is real. Like, it's not just like, oh, you should do better and, like, make sure that you're always wearing a mask, always. And if you ever mess up, like, you don't care about people and you're giving into peer pressure or whatever, or the opposite.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, there's actually, like, legitimate social connotations that come with mask wearing. And like when it comes to my career, when it comes to my family relationships, when it comes to, you know, going to the chiropractor and like I feel like we're all constantly having to juggle that and like maintain a sense of sanity and, you know, care for our mental health and not like spiral. And so I just want to emphasize, like, we've been going through a lot. Like, that's a lot to try and like navigate and try and make quick decisions about
Now on a daily basis.
on a daily basis.
Yeah, it is a lot. And I don't know if people realize how much pressure or how much strain that puts on your mental health at this point. Whatever your belief is or political leaning or beliefs about the virus, whatever it is, like it is constantly on people's minds, that now to the point that when, you know, I overhear some conversations about politics or the virus or whatever's happening in the stock exchange, XYZ, people will literally roll their eyes and be like, I just don't want to hear about this anymore. I think people are just burned out. And I get it. Like, it's a lot to navigate.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I feel so burnt out. I feel like when somebody loudly announces their opinion about something related to this, like, I don't even have the energy to, like, have a conversation about it anymore. Because it's not worth it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it feels like there's no conversation that we could have that would alter your opinion or my opinion on this particular subject, whatever it may be. And so, like, I'm just not going to go there with you.
Yeah.
And sometimes to me that can feel like rolling over or just like not standing up for what I believe in. But like in actuality, it's like, no, you as a person are not like in my safe space, comfort, happy, talk through things zone. And so like, sorry, it's not worth it to me.
Also the fact that people think their opinion is original.
Oh my gosh. Or just the assumption that what I think is what everybody in this room thinks, and therefore I shall declare it loudly as if this is like, I'm just
it's
so
amazing,
over it.
and the clouds are parting as I'm speaking, and you haven't heard this before or thought of it.
Gosh, yeah.
I'm like, okay.
I'm like, nod and move on because I don't have time for this. Mm-hmm. But that like leads me to wonder, like, is there in a sense like a lack of truly building relationship because of these things? Like, is that an inability on my part to navigate conflict? Or is like it okay to cut ties like that when people are just like not going to change?
I think for me, it's been sort of a tension of when I'm in situations where I am hearing a conversation or a declaration happening, I am choosing whether I'm going to engage or not, right? So I have had times where I'm hearing someone speak loudly about what they believe, and it's totally contrary to what I believe, but I'm not part of that conversation, so my choice is to not engage because I have seen or I've experienced the way that those conversations have gone with that person, and I'm choosing to not engage and probably just to not engage with that person as much in general, because it turns into not healthy conversations, but actually essentially receiving an extended lecture. And that's not what I'm interested in doing. I think that there's so much validity to getting out of your comfort zone, to talking to people who don't agree with you, and to having real discourse. And there are people in my circle that I do have that with and that I value that with, but people that I haven't built the relational equity with to have those conversations, and who I also have seen prove themselves to be an unsafe space over and over again, I'm not going to necessarily engage. I'm not one to engage in like a sense of false approval. I mean, maybe you guys can call me out on this, but I don't think that I've done that. I am either going to go to disengage, or if I do engage, it's going to be voicing what I think, or at least questioning them. So there's been situations like that, and I mean, I think specifically about my workplace, there's both of those situations. And so that's been like interesting to navigate for me. I think that the people that I have actual relationships with are not ones that I would cut ties with just because we disagree. Because I think I don't tend to have real relationships with people who are very like standoffish and force their opinions down your throat very much in general.
Yeah,
so
I mean, those aren't the types of friends that I choose, but family, you can't, like, you don't have any choice, really.
Yeah.
Like, you don't get to say, like, oh, we don't really have to be that close of friends, you know? Like, we're family. It is what it is. Like, I feel like, for me, I feel like the conversation never seems to be able to move on to anything else. And it's like, oh, let's talk about other things. Like, I'm always trying to steer conversations, like, towards my cat, towards, like, you know, job stuff, like anything that's not like you said, an extended lecture on whatever it may be. And this is like related to all things right now, but I think I've found a hard time, like, I feel like I just want to back off and remove myself from things like that rather than like engage and be like, how do we have a healthy conversation about this? Or is there a way to have a healthy conversation about this? And I don't know.
Yeah. One thing I will say, that was a really hard conversation that I had with my dad in November. We were disagreeing about something, and it got to the point where I was like in tears about this, like totally like upset and like heartbroken over some of the things that my dad had said, over the ways that I interpreted certain things that my dad had said. And in that situation, like, I pushed really hard to get us to a point of like understanding one another again. It was a moment where I felt like there was a big break. Like my dad and I have had tons of disagreements about things before. We're on very different sides of the political spectrum. We have different thoughts about faith. Like, there's so much we disagree about on. But I really pushed to the point where he was like, we need to stop talking about this. But I was like, no, I want us to get to a point where we're understanding where the other person's coming from and where we can walk away still saying that we love each other and that our relationship is not going to have this like rift after this. And because like I care so deeply about my relationship with my father. And that was the way that I navigated that in like us having a real like blowout about something that we really, really disagree on. And it was like hard. Like at some point I started thinking like, am I crazy? Like, am I crazy for wanting to like push for us to be at a point of understanding? And it wasn't like for us to be at a point of agreeing with one another, but for us to realize like, this is where I was coming from on this. This is where I was coming from on this. And this is where we started to have that communication breakdown that led to this escalating so much. And it felt to a point where I was like, am I beating a dead horse, or am I actually pursuing like for us to have relational resolution and for us to feel like we're okay? Because I think for me, a lot of times in my family, there's this idea of like, oh, we'll just like move on to something else. And I'm like, no, I want to push through this so that we can step forward, not just avoiding a topic or avoiding something that feels hard or just having it come up again later and be even worse, but instead like pressing and saying, I'm pursuing you. And that was hard, and that was the first time that I had really done something like that with my dad. We've had debates and arguments and stuff, and then we just kind of go, oh, well, okay. And then we go on to some other topic and talk about something else and hang out, and it's like everything's fine. So that's sort of a way that I've navigated that. I don't know if that's the right way. I don't know if I did it. I don't think I did everything right. I mean, I was very emotionally charged. I was like sobbing. But yeah, that's one way that I've tried to still pursue relationship with family members that I really disagree with. Yeah.
That's amazing. First of all, I commend you, Emma, for being willing to push in. I find myself approaching things a little differently. And this is, I don't think there's a right or wrong way. I think there's a way that works for you, that works for your personality, that works for your relationships. I think everyone's different. For me, I kind of gauge, like, I'm not super interested in engaging with the person that just wants to shove their opinion down your throat. Like you mentioned earlier, the person that just wants to announce their opinion to the room and assume everyone else agrees. Like, that's not the kind of person I want to give my emotional energy to. I'm like, okay, that's how you want to live your life. That's fine. That's
we'll
not mine. Yeah, that you don't get to be in the same space as me.
I feel that.
But when it comes to like family, I've had a very interesting journey with mine, and I love them, but I wouldn't say my relational equity with my father would not be at the same level of Emma. Like, I am gauging several things when it comes to communication with family. One is, does this person have capacity to hear actually where I'm coming from? Do I want to share my opinion because I want to be understood, or because I really feel that I'm right and I'm going to shove that onto them? Or even, is there, like, it's sad when you're talking about family, but is there even like the relational commitment to this? Like, me and my dad have a mutual understanding that was agreed upon a long time ago. And even though we're kind towards each other, we are not intentional in building relationship. And that wasn't not something that's like, I mean, it's a bummer, but it's mostly like, okay, you told me you don't have emotional capacity to pursue a relationship with me. Okay, that means you don't get all these things. And when it comes to things like that, like, okay, you don't get my emotional energy, and you don't get my you don't get to hold that space for me. So if you want to share your opinion with the room, that's okay, but that doesn't mean that I need to engage with it.
Yeah. Well, I almost even think of like the three of us, we've never had a blowout, but we've definitely had like conversations about things we disagreed on.
Mm-hmm.
But in some ways, I feel like the direction has always been a lot less like combative and more like, oh, but have you ever thought of this? Or, oh, I had heard that. And we're kind of like, oh, no, I hadn't. And to me, it feels like more like a long-term growing and learning and understanding each other as opposed to like, we disagree. We're so polarized on all of these things. And if we don't solve every single disagreement in this one conversation, like we're never going to get together. You know what I mean? It's felt to me more like well, obviously it's a long process of like getting to know someone means learning to understand their perspective and choosing to understand like where they come from and wanting to know where they come from. And that has to be a two-way street. And so I would say almost in some relationships, there is no two-way street. There's only one way. And if things can't open up in that direction, then they can't, you know?
Yeah, I do feel like thinking about that concept, family is such a funny thing because I think that even if you're not close to your family, there is this sort of assumption that you know one another better than anybody else could. And obviously, like, if you are estranged from family members, then that assumption maybe doesn't apply as much. But, like, there's this assumption, and I think that because that's in place, as opposed to a friendship like ours where we are always learning new things about one another and we're growing, and we also recognize that like we're choosing one another. Whereas in family, I think there's the aspect of, on the one hand, I feel like I know you because I've grown up with you, or whatever it is, or I raised you, or you raised me. There's that assumption, and then there's also the assumption that we're family, so I can push and shove this down your throat as much as I want because you're not going to leave because we're family.
Right.
And I think that there's also this factor of, especially I think if it's family members you grew up with, like siblings or parents, where it's like, I think baffling to think that someone would come to a different conclusion than you, having the same upbringing. So like, it would be baffling to my brother if I had a totally different opinion from him about really big things in life, like the way to live your life and the way that the country should be run or the faith that you should have. It would be baffling to him that I would choose a different path than him because we were raised in the same household. It was baffling to my mom when I chose to become a Christian because she was like, I did not raise you that way. So yeah, I think that there's also that aspect where it feels almost like it doesn't add up to us maybe and to them, you know?
Yeah.
Like to me, it's like, well, how could you have not come to this conclusion?
Right.
And to them, they're thinking the same thing.
I do actually lean towards, I've done all this journeying and searching and seeking understanding, and I've read all these books now, and, you know, even just, like, I went to college.
Yeah.
And then coming back to, like, hometown, you know, and it was like, oh, you haven't been on that journey, but, like, I assume that you have, just because we're both, like, we've both matured, you know?
Yeah.
And so
just because you're physically older,
right,
doesn't mean you've matured.
Yeah, or I mean, they've matured in different ways,
yeah.
but like haven't come down the same paths of understanding that I've come down, and so I tend to like assume like, oh yeah, like my worldview makes sense because of all of these things. Like, haven't you experienced that? Don't you know that? Like,
yeah.
And so obviously that's, you know, not helpful when it comes to dealing with people that you've known for a long time, like family.
Definitely. Well, and I think life circumstances also, or not just the life circumstances, but also the choices people choose when they choose their life circumstances. There we go. Not everyone can choose everything, but something I've noticed about all three of us is we actively seek discomfort. even though we all choose each other and we love each other, and I love actually how our growth and the way we communicate flows very freely and very kindly and respectfully, we are all individuals that are resilient and choose to do things that aren't comfortable. That's not necessarily everyone else, especially when you see people with similar circles and that stay. I mean, my family has lived in the same state their whole lives. And I'm like, that's not a bad thing. But I'm like, oh, that's all you know. Versus me, I chose to move at 18 to California by myself, not knowing anyone. And those choices shape you, I think, differently. And especially even rounding out the way people communicate and ideals and all those things. And it is interesting, though, that, like what Emma said, like how we almost don't think of family as their own people. Like, you are your own person with your own experiences, even though our experiences have maybe been similar and maybe we're shaped by the same things. But I'm like, it's kind of like interesting to think about your family and how it's like, oh, you should think this way, because I have 3 sisters. We were all raised by the same people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Me and my sisters are all incredibly, vastly different people that would make completely different choices given the same circumstance. And I think that's both beautiful and also challenging, because then you get to try and understand those other mindsets.
Mm.
Yeah. It's challenging. Where do we go from here? I don't know. I feel like we have a lot to manage. I mean, and it's not that these disagreements didn't exist before, but I definitely feel like the pandemic and all of the events of this past year have really brought a lot of them to the surface. And now, on top of all that, we have like a visible indicator of your political leaning, it seems like, where it's like if you wear a mask, you're one way, and if you don't, then you're another. Yeah. And it's not actually like seeing people for who they are. Mm-hmm. But then you can't be in close relationship with everybody that you know. And so when you walk into a room and everyone's wearing masks and you're not, or vice versa, like there's kind of that's where that peer pressure kind of plays a role. And you want to fit in, you want to impress your workplace associates, you want to, you know, not offend people, etc. And it gets complicated.
It does get complicated.
And conflict resolution and deep conversation is not always the way to, like, resolve any of that. Sometimes you just have to, like, make compromises or live in disagreement. Yeah,
that's the thing is, over the years I've learned a lot about things like conflict resolution and feedback and ways to handle those things. And I have to remember, similar to you, like, the other people in my life haven't necessarily had those experiences and therefore might not be as willing to go through those steps and to try to come to that point of resolution. Like with that conflict with my father, like he was pretty unwilling to do that. And I like petitioned with him, like, I want to do this. I need to do this. Like, can we please go through and like just talk about this? And I mean, I think he conceded out of, you know, love for me and like that we have that relationship, but I'm also not necessarily going to go through all of that with everybody that I know, you know, just for the sake of my own like mental stability.
Well, just time. Like, you're a busy woman. You have
I don't have enough time.
On. Yeah. Like,
I don't have time for anything.
I got a job. I've got a podcast. I've got a cat. Like, that's important.
You work out.
Yeah. Sometimes,
you
like,
meal prep. You do a lot of things.
There's a lot of things. But there are some people where I feel like, oh, like, we have really good conversations, and your, like, source of, or, like, your opinion, your end conclusion is very different from mine. But, like, I really feel like I glean a lot from you, and we learn a lot from each other. And so I feel like I just don't know how to make that happen for everybody. But I guess I can't.
It's really not our responsibility.
It's not my job.
Yeah. I definitely am like, I mean, ever since I've kind of settled into my mid-20s, it's like, okay, you're going to think what you think about me regardless of like what you actually know or what rapport we've built for people more on the outside, not necessarily for close people.
Yeah.
For closer people, I'd be willing to sit down and have a conversation depending on how respectful it is and the heart, and like, hey, like, this is just my opinion and the way I live my life. Like, I don't expect you to live the same way, which is why, you know, we need people that are different from us. And those things can be challenging as well. But I think for myself, I just read the situation and I kind of go through that list of things, like what's this other person's capacity? What's their willingness? And then am I trying to prove something? Mm-hmm. And that kind of gives me my guidelines and kind of go from there. I mean, peer pressure is a real thing, though. And again, I really admire my husband because he will just do exactly what he thinks is right.
Yeah.
And he has no problem sticking to his guns with that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. We're navigating a lot. And so women beings out there, thank you for listening today. If you have answers to some of our questions, we'd love to hear your thoughts. But I would say the take-homes are don't shame yourself for giving into peer pressure, because it's more complicated than just like saying no to the bully on the playground. It is. It really is. So you are doing the best you can and making the best decisions within the context that you're given. And we support you and love you. And as long as you have peace within your heart, that is the decision that you should make. Mm-hmm. And thank you guys for your wonderful thoughts.
Of course, anytime.
Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome. And I hope that you're already following us. But if you're not, you can follow us on Instagram at Woman Being Podcast. We also have a website, womanbeingcommunity.com. Please like, share, comment, leave a review, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.